President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, is once again setting another 2-week deadline for Vladimir Putin to make progress on peace, while at the same time playing to the hardliners by claiming that he supposedly supports strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation. Many Russian propagandists have already latched onto Donald Trump's wording, where he said that in 2 weeks we'll see who exactly is holding up the entire peace process, hinting that maybe it's not Russia, maybe it's Ukraine, and in that case Ukraine should be punished. And Russia responds by saying that the agenda for the meeting between Putin and Zelensky isn't ready, so there won't be any Putin-Zelensky summit in the near future. Let's now go over the chronology of the latest statements, and in the past 24 hours what they really mean and what levers of influence Donald Trump still has. Or will he, after 2 weeks, say he'll give another 2 weeks with no sanctions and so on? My name is Alexei Pecci. Today is August 23rd. Let's go over everything in order. We'll discuss these new 2 weeks of Donald Trump, support for strikes on Russia, and the negotiations that have completely stalled. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe. Subscribe to this channel, leave a like, write any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pecci News. The link is in this video's description. So, let's start with the latest 2-week plan from the American President Trump. He announced it on the air of the Todd Starnes show. He said that within 2 weeks we will know if there is progress in resolving Russia's war against Ukraine. And that's his direct quote. Then he adds that if it doesn't work out, we'll have to change tactics. Trump doesn't explain exactly how or what he plans to do. At the same time, he posted on the social network Truth Social what would be called a morale signal in normal diplomacy. Quote, "Winning a war is nearly impossible without attacking the aggressor country." Then he used a sports metaphor about defense without offense and accused Joe Biden, saying that he was the one who didn't give Ukraine offensive weapons, and Ukraine was forced to stay in a defensive position and as a result didn't win this war. This message was so clear that the American media conveyed it unedited. And some said that this is a signal to Moscow that he is supposedly ready to reconsider his doctrine regarding supplying weapons to Ukraine. Others said that there was actually no signal here at all. This is just an excuse for the current situation and an attempt to blame Joe Biden for it. But the Wall Street Journal writes that the familiar 2-week deadline and once again the threat of mass layoffs, sanctions or massive tariffs if there is no progress. This is another bluff by Donald Trump. The newspaper notes Trump has used this timing before. The Alaskan summit with Putin did not lead to a breakthrough, sanctions were not imposed then and most likely will not be imposed now either. As for Moscow's response, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, says that Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky when the agenda is ready. This agenda is not ready at all, so there will be no negotiations in the near future. And here, I would like to note that Lavrov suddenly started appearing on American television channels. Putin began to show up there as well. And Trump, in fact, managed to do the unthinkable. He legitimized the Russians. Creatures now publicly appear on American television. So as you understand, this isn't some kind of behind-the-scenes leak. No talks are planned between Putin and Zelensky soon. These are Lavrov's words on National Broadcasting Company news, which were repeated by major news agencies. He spoke and his words were later quoted. Against this backdrop, The Guardian writes that a week after Alaska, progress is slipping away. Trump is threatening sanctions again. Russia says there is no agenda, so a meeting between Putin and Zelensky won't happen either. It's important to note that Trump's support for strikes on Russian territory is not an order to the military, it's just a political post on social media. That's exactly how it should be treated. Here, ABC accurately presents Trump's words and ties them to Moscow lowering summit expectations. A quote in their retelling, "It's hard to win a war without attacking the aggressor country." And that's basically it. This is simply Trump stating a fact, nothing more. So what are the facts in the end? The deadline is 2 weeks. The weekly deadline has been publicly announced. But this is not a legal term, it's just a political statement. Tariffs and sanctions are currently just threats, not actions. After the Alaska summit, they weren't applied and likely won't be in the future. Russia says there is no agenda, which means Putin and Zelensky are not meeting. Kyiv is sticking to the line of real security guarantees and is not ready to make a deal at any cost. Now let's break down what all this means. First 2 weeks. Second, it's a political framework, not a legal ultimatum. And you need to understand that Trump often does this to keep the news agenda and pressure on his counterparts. Translating from political to plain language, Trump leaves himself a window to turn either way. To the right, he can go for sanctions, and to the left, he can announce another pause. He gave no specifics or legal details, just said, let's take 2 weeks and see. Nothing definite. Second, this post on the United Nations Support Social Network, meaning support for strikes on Russia, is a signal to both Kyiv and Moscow at the same time. For Ukraine, it's like saying, I understand, you need to strike Russia. Joe Biden was ineffective, you needed to strike, but he stopped you. For Moscow, it's kind of a hint that if you keep resisting, I can legitimize Ukraine's strike doctrine against Russian territory. But still, all of this is just a social media post. It's not a Pentagon directive. It's not an order to the military. And what's interesting here is that in this context, Trump is making himself look foolish. I'll explain why. Because it's beneficial for the Kremlin to portray that it's Zelensky and Trump who are advocating for war, while Moscow is promoting an agenda that could serve as a basis for negotiations. Of course, there is no agenda. But they say, let's actually talk about things specifically. We've reached a state of zen. We're calm. We're for an agenda. But Trump and Zelensky, they're for war. What about them? One argues Russia must be struck. The other opposes any conditions or concessions. And third, why isn't the agenda ready? It's a convenient formula for Moscow because a ready agenda for the Kremlin means concessions in advance. These are territorial boundaries, Ukraine's status outside of NATO, restrictions on armaments, and the Russian Federation's right to veto any security guarantees for Ukraine. And that's exactly what Lavrov has been saying for more than a day now. As he says, discussing guarantees without Russia's participation is a road to nowhere. This is a line that blocks any automatic supply of weapons and sanctions, weapons for Ukraine, sanctions against Russia. The fourth thing that can really change Trump's tactics, he says, 2 weeks will pass and I'll change my tactics. Maybe if 2 weeks pass and there are still no sanctions, then it was just tactical noise, just an informational agenda. But if the White House imposes secondary sanctions against buyers of Russian oil, and possibly even the sellers of that oil, and sanctions targeting shipping insurance and the shadow fleet, plus a package of long-range weapons for Ukraine, maybe missiles, drones, or air defense systems, then Moscow will really face a shift in the balance, not just in words, but in reality. So far we see one thing. Trump, well, as he hinted, supposedly allows Ukraine to play offense in words, while the Kremlin publicly attended the meeting. To the wall. No phrase or agenda. This is how all of Kyiv hears it. The signal about the strikes is positive, but it's just political. But the key is security guarantees, similar to Article 5 of the NATO Charter and the automatic supply of sanctions, weapons deliveries, and the imposition of sanctions against Russia. Without these 2-week frameworks mean absolutely nothing. The Europeans have also been insisting on this in their briefings over the past few days, and this is key right now. So, despite all this informational noise with the Europeans, Ukraine is trying to push its position regarding security guarantees. And as a conclusion, I can say that we don't have a crisis of diplomacy, as many might claim right now. We have a crisis of sincerity. Because everyone is trying to dodge, everyone is trying to bluff, to play along, and trying to make themselves look like the smartest one. And Trump promises a change in tactics in 2 weeks, but doesn't say exactly what he's going to strike with. The Kremlin is tempting with an alleged willingness for a meeting with Putin, but only after Ukraine agrees to discuss some agenda that suits Moscow. Kyiv sticks to its demand for strong security guarantees and doesn't play along with a paper peace, where something is just written down and nothing more. So the next 2 weeks are not about the meeting of the century, as some American media have already called it, but about checking whether Washington really has any leverage. Or will it be another 2 weeks again, then another, and so on? I'll just leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.